Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavate Uttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhavatir Naishtiki Om Agyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mukham karoti vachanam pangam langate girim yatkapatamaham vande Shri Gurudina Taranam Paramanandam Madhavam. So we were in the concluding part of the 28th chapter, which talks about the liberation and the state of mind of the yogi, one who is following this process of Ashtanga Yogi. The bulk of the chapter was I think I forgot to put the Prem Kishore Prabhu, do you remember where we left off?
36, Prabhu. We should start 36.
36.
I kept it on the screen, Prabhu.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu. Okay, so starting from verse 36. Swapetaya charamaya manaso nivritya tasmin mahimya visthit avasita sukha dukha bhai etutvam apyasati kartari dukhayorayat swatman vidatta upalabdha paratmakasata. Thus situated in the highest transcendental stage, the mind ceases from all material reaction and becomes situated in its own glory, transcendental to all material conceptions of happiness and distress. At that time, the yogi realizes the truth of his relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He discovers that pleasure and pain, as well as their interactions, which he attributed to his own self, are actually due to the false ego, which is a product of ignorance. So, paramaya means final, and manaso nivritya means destruction of the mind. So, towards the perfection of the process, the material mind, the manaso nivritya, that is finally destroyed, charamaya. And the jiva is now situated in his true glorious position. So Lord Kapila, he gives a few symptoms to contrast the two situations. Now, the stage of transcendence to happiness and distress, the yogi actually had already achieved this. Even in the preliminary stages, the person transcends, he becomes sama sukha dukha. But at this point, the change is irreversible. That he's now finally, charamaya, he's finally beyond that stage of of happiness and distress. And it's interesting that Lord Kapila uses the word dukha yoho. So he's addressing both happiness as well as distress as dukha. And we know from a material perspective, happiness is also distress because it is temporary, because it leaves one unsatisfied, it causes frustration, causes one hankering for more. So it is a it is unhappiness that is just coated with a thin layer of apparent happiness. Now, when Lord Kapila is saying he's beyond happiness, he says that he's beyond material happiness. Now he's obviously within the stage of spiritual happiness, but he's now beyond that, the material happiness. What else happens at this stage? So the yogi, having realized himself as Atma, he sees the cause, the hetu of his material existence and distress as Kartari. Kartari is the false ego. So even we can see that our material existence and distress is because of our false ego. But the yogi has actually experienced that and moved beyond. So we are seeing it intellectually. He is seeing it experientially. He actually feels that this material and distress is being caused by Kartari, by the false ego. So which means that he's not only able to see his present state, he's also seeing his previous state. And this is one of the symptoms of liberation, that a liberated soul does not forget his previous state of existence. In fact, at some places, Prabhupada says that he remembers everything, not just this birth, but all the births that he has had in the material world, which are millions and millions of births. He remembers that. And then he feels disgust. He feels he's shocked of all that he has undergone in an attempt to enjoy separately from Krishna. And that is the reason it is said that once the soul returns to the spiritual world, it doesn't fall again, because it is always aware of all the suffering that it has gone through. So in addition to this, the mind of the jiva is also destroyed. So the destroying of the mind results in the jiva being situated in his swarup. And this swarup gyan is the bliss of knowledge that he experiences. So Vishwanath Chakravarti says that this glory was previously stolen by the material mind. The glory of the Swarup, the glory of the essential spiritual existence, that was stolen by the material mind. Stolen means that it covered it. And now that the yogi has destroyed that mind, he has regained that glory. But we know that even the mind is not the root cause. It's just a chain of the causes. So Lord Kapila says that beyond the mind, the destruction of avidya also happens. And avidya is the root cause. So what is avidya? Avidya is that mentality that the jiva developed of wanting to enjoy separately from Krishna. That started everything into motion. So based on that avidya, ahankar came. Based on that ahankar, then the buddhi and manas came. Based on that, then the senses came, and then the engagement with the material world. So Lord Kapila is saying that this process, it does not prune the wheat, because you cut the wheat, it will grow back again. As long as avidya is there, you may suppress the other parts, you may even cut the other parts, but they'll still go back. But this process, it uproots avidya. And the cause of that is mentioned here as etaya, as the practice of yoga. By the practice of this Astanga yoga, this avidya is destroyed. So one may question over here that the very nature of Atma is happiness and distress. So how can the Atma be completely beyond happiness and distress? So the point that is made over here, that this happiness and distress is different from what the soul experiences in the spiritual conception. This happiness and distress is, Lord Kapila says, that asati, that it is ignorance that is resulting in kartari, that is resulting in ahankar, which is resulting in happiness and distress. In its intrinsic position, yeah, the soul, we see even the eternal associates of Krishna, they experience distress. They experience distress in separation from Krishna. They express distress when the service is impeded. They express distress to somehow or the other increase the mellows, different kind of distress. But this is not the removal. It's not that the soul becomes devoid of any emotions. But Lord Kapila is specifically saying, so he's trying to make sure that the reader understands that the process of yoga is not to put the soul into deep sleep. Vishnu Chakravarti actually makes this point over and over again in the purport, that this state is not that of deep sleep, because in deep sleep the everything may be subdued except for avidya. Avidya still remains. And that is why as soon as the jiva wakes up, avidya acts again, and then everything else manifests itself. But this is the stage of liberation, where beginning from avidya, everything else is destroyed. So what does avidya get replaced by? Lord Kapila says, upalabdha paratma kashata. So he realizes his condition as a materially conditioned soul. So we said two things. One thing is swarup, the jiva, the soul realizes his swarup, and the second thing is upalabdha paratma kashata. He also understands the material conditioning that he has. So it's not that he forgets everything, that when he's back to Krishna, he forgets everything that he was suffering in the material world. No, he remembers. That's part of the liberation process. And that is also the one difference between this state and deep sleep that happens at pralaya. So in pralaya, everything is destroyed with the exception of avidya. So when the jiva goes back into the body of Mahavishnu, then the subtle body is destroyed. And in the subtle body is ahankar. So ahankar is destroyed. But the avidya is carried along with the spirit soul. That is preserved. But in this case, even that avidya is destroyed. So Srila Prabhupada says that forgetfulness of one's relationship is a product of ignorance. By yoga practice, one can eradicate this ignorance of thinking oneself independent of the Supreme Lord. One's actual relationship is eternally that of love. Vishwanath Chakravarti makes another point, it's a slightly technical point that he makes, that why does
Premkishar Prabhu, are you able to hear Prabhuji? It seems he's stuck too, right?
Yeah. I was just waiting. Are you back, Prabhu? Hare Krishna, Prabhu. You there?
Can you hear me, Haribo?
Yeah, we can hear you, Prabhu.
Okay. Okay. So, what point?
You were on the actual relationship is eternal. The forgetfulness of one's relationship is state of ignorance.
Okay. So I was just talking about the concluding part of this, that Vishwanath Chakravarti, he mentions over here that despite this exalted state of the yogi, why is this still considered to be not the optimal, not the highest liberation? And then the point that he makes is that because the yogi, he was attached to the process because he was attached to liberation. So whatever he was doing, even the worship of the Lord that he was doing, he was mukti kama. He was doing it with the desire for liberation. So because of that strong attraction, he finds it difficult to completely detach his mind from this notion of liberation. And that causes the bhakti to become inferior. So he sees himself as a pure spirit. He sees his relationship to the Lord. He sees the problems of the material world experientially. Whatever he has experienced, he sees this. He regains his spiritual mind. Avidya is destroyed, but he is not able to serve the Lord. And that's why this liberation is still not of the highest category. Okay, so let's do verse 37. Teham chatam na charamastitam uthitam va siddho vipashyati yato adhigyamat swarupam devadupetam matha devavasadapetam vaso yatha parikritam madira madandaha. Because he has achieved his real identity, the perfectly realized soul has no conception of how the material body is moving or acting. Just as an intoxicated person cannot understand whether or not he has clothing on his body. So these two verses describe his internal conception. So he sees himself presently as a spirit soul, and also sees himself in the past as the conditioned soul. So having these two visions, the Jiva Mukta, the liberated soul, he does not see the body. Seeing the body means he does not relate to the body anymore. He does not experience the happiness and distress related to the body. So the word parikritam means clothed. So just like an intoxicated person, he does not understand whether he is clothed or not, or what his actions are, because his mind is not focused on it. He has at least an intoxicated state, they probably focus on something else. But in this stage, the Jiva Mukta, he's actually looking upon the body as an extraneous covering. And to some extent, we can relate to it that if you're wearing some clothes on our body, then there's not much that maybe we might in some situation draw some pride or whatever from the clothes, but otherwise they're just clothes. If they get cut, so be it. If they're burnt, so be it. They're just clothes. So it's not that that we are not able to see the clothes, we are not able to understand that clothes are what we are wearing. It's the opposite, that we actually understand clearly how do we relate to these clothes. So Prabhupada in the purport, he says that this stage of life is explained by Rupa Goswami in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. A person whose mind is completely dovetailed with the desires of the personality of Godhead, who engages 100%, forgets his material bodily demands. So this is Srila Prabhupada equating the stage with that of a devotee. This stage with the yogi achieves by the Astanga yoga, the devotee reaches it naturally. And in case of the devotee, this minimizing of the material is happening because the person is too busy serving the Lord. Too busy, Prabhupada says 100%. So there is 0% time for anything else. So here another point that is made is that the word Swarupam does not mean the original constitutional position. So Vishwanath Chakravarti says that that Swarupam here means the understanding that I am a spirit soul. So just like an intoxicated person loses awareness of the clothing, the yogi, because of this Swarupam, that he now knows that he is a spirit soul, he does not care about the material body. So there's a person who's sitting in a car, and then at some point he gets off the car. Then after that, there's no attachment to the car. Maybe while he was in the car, he was like, okay, I'm driving this car, I am this car. But then at some point, he gets off the car, that's it. He's separate and the car is separate. This is the realization. But Vishwanath Chakravarti continues to make this point that this Swarupam is not the stage of Jivere Swarup Hoy Krishna Nityadas. This is the Swarupam of Aham Brahmasmi. And Prabhupada also, he does not directly make this point, but he makes it through by comparison with the mood of a devotee who's actually seeing himself as the eternal servant of Krishna. Verse 38. Deopi deva vasaga khalu karma yavat swarambakam pratismakshta eva shashu tamsa prapannam adhiruddha samadhi yoga swapnam punarna bhajate pratibuddha vastu. The body of such a liberated yogi, along with the senses, is taken charge by the Supreme Personality of God. And it functions until its destined activities are finished. The liberated devotee, being awake to his constitutional position and thus situated in Samadhi, the highest perfectional stage of yoga, does not accept the byproducts of the material body as his own. Thus he considers his bodily activities to be like the activities of a body in a dream. So this verse answers the question that why does a person who has transcended the modes still continues to retain his physical body? And the answer that is given here is that just because the soul is living in a body does not mean that the soul is covered by the body. So in this position, the material body of a liberated soul is actually taken charge by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So what is the other option? That the material body of the soul is acting because of Deva Vasagaha. It's acting by the force of previous impressions, which is another way of saying that it is being controlled by karma. And that's what Bhagavad Gita Krishna says. Karma is those activities that result in the creation of a material body. So the material body is essentially a manifestation of karma. For such a person who is already liberated, he retains a material body, but it is no longer under the control of prarabdha karma. It is actually under the control of Krishna. So why does the liberated yogi even keep the material body? So the Prabhupada gives one explanation that he gives the analogy of an electric fan, that it continues to rotate even after the power has been switched off because of past inertia. And the other understanding that Prabhupada gives is because so long the soul has been serving the body. Now in this state, the soul is using the body to serve Krishna. And that's why it is also said that it is taken charge by the personality of Godhead, because it is only being used for the pleasure of the personality of Godhead. And what are the symptoms of this? Lord Kapila gives the symptoms that the yogi is in the stage of samadhi. Samadhi means being one with the Lord. And he has no desires to enjoy the body or its extensions. So extensions refer to family, to children or siblings or those who are related to the body. So at this stage, the person, he has no attraction to those that are the byproducts of his family, of his body, or the demands of the body. The analogy is given that that body is like a dream body. So when a person awakens from a sleep, he may remember the dream, but he is not impacted by it. The person may dream that I was attacked by a tiger, and in the dream may be scared. But once he wakes up, then he's like, okay, I had this dream. And I was pretty scared, but it's a dream. Neither was I attacked, nor was the tiger real, nor was I hurt. So that's why this is called a dream-like body. So Prabhupada says that as one who is awake has no connection with the activities of the body in a dream, an awakened, liberated soul has no connection with the activities of the present body. In other words, he is acquainted with his constitutional position. He never accepts the bodily concept of life. Okay, verse 39. Yatha putra chavita cha prathan martya pratiyate apyatma vena bhimattad deha depurushas tatha. Because of great affection for family and wealth, one accepts a son and some money as his own. And due to affection for the material body, one thinks that it is his. But actually, as one can understand, that his family and wealth are different from him. The liberated soul can understand that he and his body are not the same. So the previous verse describes the siddhas. those who are perfected. But before a person becomes a siddha, they are aspirants, they are sadhakas. This verse is talking about a sadhaka. Now, how does a sadhaka conduct himself? So, in this and 39, 40, and 41, Lord Kapila, he takes a step back and he talks about the maturing of the realization of a yogi on his way to perfection. So for sadhakas, certain things are favorable and certain things are unfavorable. And they're supposed to discriminate. They're supposed to accept and reject. Anukul and pratikul. Accept what is anukul and reject what is pratikul. And we know that this is not just for yogis. Same injunction is there for devotees also. Bhakti Vinod Thakur says in Sharnagati, Bhakti Anukul Matra Karyena, that one should accept favorable habits and practices towards devotional service. And then Bhakti Pratikul Bhava Varjangikara, that one should reject the unfavorable habits. So similarly, the sadhaka yogi will distinguish and discriminate between favorable and unfavorable. So here he is understanding himself to be different from the body. And then in 40, 41, the next two verses, he will understand that the Lord is different from him. So in this process of successive discriminations, he will, after if he successfully executes it, then he will reach the stage that has been mentioned in the previous verse, that of a siddha, who is perfectly situated in Vidya and Swarup. So first step is to see the self as soul and not the body. Right? This is the basic step. Krishna talks about it in the very first instruction to Krishna, to Arjuna. He says, you're not the body, you are the soul. And here the point is also made that not just the body, but that which is connected to the body. Prabhupada says there are many children, but we accept some children as our sons and daughters because of affection for them. So why do we distinguish between children? Because there are some children that are produced from our body and there are others that are not. So it is not that we are affectionate to children. It is really that we are affectionate to them because they're connected to our body. Similarly, Prabhupada says there is a lot of money, but we have affection for some money because we have control of it. So this whole notion of I and mine is basic, everything else is secondary. So Prabhupada says, but actually, the sun and the money are separate from me. It is the same with the body. I'm separate from the body. It is a question of understanding, and the proper understanding is called Prati-Buddha. So one may say that this analogy is easier understood when it comes to things like, I can see the difference between the father and the son, or the man and his wealth, but it is not that easy to see the difference between the body and the soul, because the body is visible and the soul is not. So in order to explain this further, Lord Kapila will give another analogy in the next two verses to further explain this. So we'll do verses 40, 41. I'll try and finish this chapter and then we can break for discussion. Yathol mukad vishpulingat. Different. Thumadvapi swasambhavat apyatmadvena bimatta yatagnihi prathag ulmukha bhutendriyanta karna pradhana jiva samgyata atma tatha prathagrasta Bhagavan Brahma Samgyataha. The blazing fire is different from the flames, from the sparks, and from the smoke. Although all are intimately connected, because they are born from the same blazing wood. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is known as Param Brahma, is the seer. He is different from the Jiva soul, or the individual living entity, who is combined with the senses, the five elements, and consciousness. So in these two verses, Lord Kapila is explaining that the Lord is different from the Jiva. So just as the fire is different from the wood, it is different from the sparks, and it is different from smoke, yet they appear non-different, and they're collectively referred to as fire. And this is specifically for people who lack discrimination. So they will see and they will say there is a fire, but a person who is more discriminating, he will be able to see there is wood, there is fire, there is smoke, and there is the sparks. So Prabhupada says a less intelligent person accepts the smoke as fire, although fire and smoke are completely different. The heat and light of fire are separate, although one cannot differentiate from heat and light. Similarly, now, what is this analogy talking about? So what it's talking about is that the Lord is different from Pradhan, Jiva, body, and senses, since he is the seer. So in this analogy, the Lord is compared to fire, Pradhan is compared to wood. So fire appears in the wood just as the super soul appears in Pradhan. So because of the appearance of Lord Vishnu, Pradhan actually manifests, just like wood is fire is appearing in wood. Now the sparks, they are the part and parcel of fire. So they are like fire, but different. This is one of the analogies that Srila Prabhupada often gives. That the jivas, they are like the sparks of the fire. They have the quality of fire, but they are infinitesimal, and the fire is infinite. So the sparks are jivas. Now smoke is the product of the burning of the wood. Similarly, the body, the senses, and the antakaranas are the product of the pradhan that is acted upon by the Lord. So we discussed this in the creation discussion, that because of the activities of the Lord, the pradhan, it gets distilled into the material elements that form the body and the subtle elements that form the senses. The antakaranas are basically the four subtle: mind, intelligence, false ego, and chitta. So this is compared to smoke. And the light and heat are the different energies of the Lord. So Prabhupada elaborates on this in the purport, but essentially I've summarized it. So Prabhupada also states that that just as the fire distributes light and heat from one place, the personality of Godhead distributes its different energies all over the creation. So this is an understanding of the analogy of light and heat. Then Prabhupada makes this point that the four principles of Vaishnava philosophic doctrine are Shuddha Advaita, purified oneness, Dvaita Advaita, simultaneous oneness and difference, Vishishta Advaita, which is qualified oneness, and Dvaita, which is duality. All the four principles of Vaishnava philosophy are based on the thesis of Srimad Bhagavatam explained in these two verses. The Prabhupada said these two verses are important. So these are the two verses that we are studying right now, 40, 41. So they are important because they actually form the basis of all the four Vaishnava sampradayas. So the Shuddha Advaitavad, so Prabhupada talks about first Shuddha Advaita, which is purified oneness, and this is the sampradaya of Vallabhacharya and Vishnu Swami, which is the Rudra Sampradaya and popularly known as Pushti Marg. Then the Dvaitavad or the Bhedavad is the Brahma Sampradaya that is popularized by Sripad Madhvacharya and also later on by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as Achinta Bhedavada, which is the sampradaya that we are in, the Brahma Gaudiya Marg. And the Vishishta Advaitavad is the Sri Sampradaya of Ramanujacharya. And the Dvaitavad is the Kumar Sampradaya. Acharya is Nimbarkacharya. And it's also important to note that Advaitavad of Adi Shankaracharya is not considered to be a bona fide Vaishnava doctrine, even though Adi Shankaracharya, he glorifies Krishna at different points, but philosophically it is not considered as a Vaishnava Sampradaya. So in order to explain this, and we won't go into it because it would be a whole discussion in itself, but it would be an interesting exercise to take this analogy and see how the four sampradayas, they can be explained using this analogy of the blazing fire being different from the flames and the spark and the the smoke, and how the heat and the light of the fire is emanating. Okay, verse 42. Sarvabhuteshu chatmanam sarvabhutani chatmani iksheta tanyabhave.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, it is 41, sorry.
I actually covered 41 along with the previous verse. So we are going to 42. Sarvabhuteshu chatmanam sarvabhutani chatmani ikshetananya bhavena bhuteshviva tadatmatam. A yogi should see the same soul in all manifestations. For all that exists is a manifestation of different energies of the Supreme. In this way, the devotee should see all living entities without distinction. That is the realization of the Supreme Soul. So this is the third progressive state of the vision of the yogi. The first stage was given in verse 39, where he sees the jiva different from matter. In verse 39, Lord Kapila says that a liberated soul can understand that he and his body are not the same. The second stage is where the yogi is seeing the Paramatma different from matter and jiva. So this is verse 41. Parabrahma is the seer. He is different from the soul, the five elements, and consciousness. The third stage is seeing the Paramatma as the cause and the resting place of all the jivas and all matter. So this was explained. This is explained in this verse, that the yogi should see the same soul in all manifestations. So we see that the initial stage is the yogi detaching from matter. The second stage is the yogi seeing himself as a pure spirit soul and the Lord as pure spirit. And then in this stage, he is now seeing the relationship that he and everybody else and everything else has the Lord, has with the Lord. So here he is seeing the Paramatma not only different, not only as spirit, but also the cause and the ultimate resting place of everything material and spiritual. So why does the person see the Paramatma in everybody? Because the cause is present in the effect. The one sees all beings in the Paramatma because the effect merges into the cause. So this dual statements, sometimes they seem to be contradictory. You see the Lord in everybody and everything in the Lord. So that is explained over here, that you see the Lord in everybody because you understand he is the cause of everything. And because the cause is present in the effect, you see the Lord in everything. So because the Lord created the material world, then you see the Lord in the material world because he is the cause of it. And then you see the effect. You see the effect because all the effects ultimately merge back into the Lord. So this vision of the practicing yogi is still, because he is a sadhaka, so this vision is not a realization, but it is an understanding. And that's the difference between a siddha and a sadhaka. So the philosophy is equally understood by the sadhaka and the siddha. This is true for Bhakti Marga also. Right? If a sadhaka was to meet with a siddha, then there will not be any philosophical disputes. Right? The sadhaka will say Krishna is the cause of all causes. Siddha will say absolutely right. Siddha will say that we all have a loving relationship with Krishna. Sadhaka will say you're absolutely right. So there won't be any philosophical disputes because the sadhaka is seeing it. He's understanding it. The only difference is that the siddha is experiencing it. When the perfected person says that Krishna is the cause of everything, he's actually experiencing the presence of Krishna in everything around him, including himself. That is the difference. So this is the Sarva Bhuteshu Chatmanam. He sees the entire material universe is resting on the Lord. So another point to be noted here is that this vision, even though it is similar, to the vision that was described for Kardama Muni in the 3rd canto, chapter 24, verse 46. But again, the difference is in terms of understanding something and realizing it. So there it was mentioned that Kardama Muni was actually seeing the living entities entering into the body of Mahavishnu. It was not a theoretical concept for it, but it was an experienced vision. That is the difference. Prabhupada says that the word Sarvabhuteshu is to be understood as follows. There are 4 different species of lives. Living entities which sprout from the earth, living entities born of fermentation or germination, living entities which come from eggs, and living entities which come from embryo. These 4 divisions of living entities are expanded into 8.4 million species. A person who is freed from material designation can see the same quality of spirit present everywhere or in every manifested living entity. Less intelligent people think that the plant and grass grows out of the earth automatically, but one who is actually intelligent has realized and has realized the self can see that growth is not automatic. The cause of the soul is the soul, and the forms come out in material bodies under different conditions. Verse 43. Svayoneshu yata jyotir nana pratiyate yoninam guna vaishamya tathatma prakritau stitaha. As fire is exhibited in different forms of wood, so under different conditions of the modes of material nature, the pure soul, the pure spirit soul, manifests itself in different bodies. So one may say that to see the same super soul present everywhere is difficult because there is such a large variety. Prabhupada talked about it in the previous purport that there are 8.4 million species. How can you understand that the same super soul is present in a tiger and a cow, in a human being and a demigod? They have so different dispositions. And one may argue that if the cause is the same, then the effect should also be the same. So if it's the same super soul that is energizing all the bodies, then it should result in the same body. Why should there be so many different bodies? So to explain this, Lord Kapila, he again uses an analogy. So he gives an analogy of fire being exhibited in different forms of wood. So the fire is the same, but it manifests in so many forms based on the substance that it is burning. If it is an elongated log, then the fire will be an elongated form. If the fire is at the end of a stick, then it will be a narrow flame. So similarly, the Paramatma is the same, but the yonis are different. And that is why his effect is manifested differently. So yoni is the 8.4 million species. So the effect looks different, not because the cause is different, but because the way that the cause is manifested. So another example is that one may see oneself in different kinds of mirrors, and the reflection may be different depending on the nature of the surface of the mirror. In some cases, when the surface is concave, then the images may be bent in a certain way. Some cases they may be enlarged or they may appear small. So the person is the same, but the images are different because of the mirror. So similarly, the super soul is the same, but the karma and the swabhav is different. And the yogi is not only understanding the super soul, but also understanding karma and swabhav. So he does not get bewildered by the presence of so many species, because he's seeing both. So just like a person, he not only understands himself, but he's also seeing the mirror. So when he sees himself all warped in the mirror, the person does not get bewildered. He says, yes, this is happening because the mirror is warped. So similarly, the yogi is not only seeing the super soul, but is also seeing the karma and swabhav. Okay, next verse, which is the last verse of the chapter. Tasmadimam swam prakritim devim sada sadatmikam durvir bhavyam parabhavya swarupena vatistate. Thus the yogi can be in the self-realized position after conquering the insurmountable spell of Maya, who presents herself as both the cause and effect of this material manifestation and is therefore very difficult to understand. So this is the final instruction to the sadhaka, to the practicing yogi, that because Prakriti shows itself in many forms and thus is the cause, tasmad is the cause of many forms, very important for the yogi to conquer Prakriti. So Prakriti is swam. It is self-supporting. It is composed of devim, which in this case can be considered to be karma, or devim can also point to the Shakti of the Lord, Devyahesha Gunamayi. So in both cases, and Prakriti is not either, it is both. It is composed of karma and is the divine energy of the Lord. In both cases, the yogi needs to conquer Prakriti, and having conquered Prakriti, he then is situated in the form of pure consciousness. So then he moves from the stage of understanding to realizing. Prabhupada concludes by saying that it may be said that the activities of Brahman realization are different from those of conditional life, but that does not stop activity. This is indicated in Bhagavad Gita 1854. After one realizes oneself to be Brahman, devotional service begins. Mad bhaktim labhate param. After Brahman realization, one can engage in the devotional service of the Lord. Therefore, devotional service of the Lord is the activity in Brahman realization. So Prabhupada is making this point out of compassion to the practicing yogis. So the practicing yogis can reach the stage of Brahman realization, which he says is they're different from conditional life. But then he's saying that at this stage, the yogi can still execute bhakti. Mad bhaktim labhate param. So he says that actually even Krishna is saying that after one has realized Brahman, devotional service begins. Now, of course, devotional service begins even before one realizes Brahman, but the point Prabhupada is making that Brahman realization is not an impediment to bhakti. That even if one has realized Brahman, and this is the vision of a devotee, So Prabhupada is looking upon such a yogi as someone who has failed, but he is giving the person encouragement. He's saying, don't worry. Just because you realize Brahman does not mean that there is no hope for you. There is hope for you. Mat bhaktim labate para. That you can still execute devotional service. And to further encourage, Prabhupada says that devotional service of the Lord is the activity in Brahman realization. So actually, you can execute high quality devotional service because you don't have any material contamination. So all you have to do is to take shelter of a devotee, take mercy of a devotee, and there is hope for you. And this is the point that will lead into the next chapter, which is essentially a discourse on pure devotional service. Okay, so let me pause over here. I'm sorry I went a little bit over. I wanted to finish this chapter. The verses are tightly clustered. So we'll pause here and see if there is any discussion. Okay, if there are no points for discussion, I know devotees, they don't relate that much to Astang. So it's not a topic that is widely discussed. Yes, Achyuta.
Prabhuji, like on the verses 40, 41, right? Which are talking about the four Vaishnava doctrines, the Shuddha Dvaita and all that. Does it mean that all of them are bona fide? It's just that the Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva is more complete than the others, or what is how do you understand those four in terms of each other?
They're all complete. It's like explaining the same essential truth in slightly different ways. The fact that they are accepted as bona fide sampradayas, which means the philosophy is accepted as bona fide sampradaya, means that they're accurate representation. And it's just like we see the same things we saw in this chapter. Lord Kapila is sometimes using the analogy of fire and smoke, and sometimes using the analogy of the shape of the fire being determined by the nature of the wood it is burning. So similar concept is explaining through slightly different ways. So that's what the four sampradayas do, that they're essentially talking about the distinction and the relationship between the Lord and the Jiva, and they explain it by slightly different ways. Like, Nimbarkacharya, they say that Dvaita, that completely two different. The Lord and the Jiva, they're completely different. And under the Brahma Sampradaya, we say that it is Achintya Bheda Bheda. We say it is different, but yet not different. Same tattva is explained slightly different. So the Dvaita talks about, well, actually it's Dvaita. So it talks about Advaita and Dvaita, and talks about the difference and the oneness, and we say it's Bheda Bheda, right? So slightly different way of talking about the same thing. A slightly different understanding of this is and this is more from the perspective of those who study, like the academicians, those who study the evolution of Vaishnavism. They explain that these tattvas were more and more differentiating from the Advaitavad. Before these sampradayas came, the predominant philosophy was that of Advaitavad. And that is why the first person to challenge it was Sripad Ramanujacharya. And because Advaitavad was so prevalent at the time that in order to present the philosophy in a way that would still be accepted, he described it as Vishishta Advaitavad, as qualified oneness. So Advaitavad is oneness. And Ramanujacharya said it is Vishishta Advaitavad, it is qualified oneness. And then later on, Madhavacharya appeared, and he was more strong in talking about the difference, and he says Dvaitavad. Dvaitavad means that they're completely different. Mahaprabhu appeared later on. The Achintya Bheda Bhed is actually considered to be a synthesis of all the four sampradayas. So the Achintya Bheda Bhed, actually, if you were to discuss it more deeply, it includes Shuddha Dvaita and Dvaita and Vishishta Dvaita. It includes all of it. So that is also one way to understand it, that as the Vaishnavas began to more strongly assert themselves as different from Shankaracharya, then they became, the tattvas became more and more distinguished from Advaita. Instead of being Vishishta Advaita, it became Advaitavad, and then became Achintya Bheda Bhed Tattva. So that's another way of understanding.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Okay, any other thoughts? Okay, so we'll begin with the 29th chapter. Just want to also, regarding next week, I won't be able to be for the Monday and the Wednesday discussions. So we have a senior devotee, a disciple of Srila Prabhupada. She's coming to spend the week with us. So we'll be mostly involved in taking care of her, and she has different programs arranged right through the week. And Monday, Wednesday, both days, there are programs that are arranged for her. So unfortunately, I will not be able to be in this discussion. We will resume from the Monday following that. Okay, so 329, explanation of devotional service by Lord Kapila. So Devahuti, so far, she has heard about Sankhya in chapters 26 and 27, and she heard about Astanga in the previous chapter, 28. Now she heard about it because she asked for it. And the reason she asked for it is for the sake of completeness, is for the sake of contrast. Now she again wants to hear about Bhakti with greater details. So here we will see Devahuti asking 3 questions that will be answered by Lord Kapila in forms of the description of Bhakti. So she will ask that, tell me more, give me details about bhakti. Then she will say, give me the nature of time. And also explain samsara. Samsara is the cycle of birth and death. So, question that I have for you is that how do the second two questions relate to bhakti? How does the question about nature of time or the cycle of birth and death relate to bhakti? What are your thoughts?
Detachment, to have more understanding of detachment.
Okay, thank you. Other thoughts?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Bhakti is the boat that takes us out of this destructive time and the repeated birth and death, the samsara. So,
Very good. Very good. Any other thoughts? So yes, I think both the answers were right on. When devotee is asking about bhakti, she also wants to hear about what is it that is preventing bhakti. And she's asking about it in a way that motivates people to take to bhakti. So when she's asking about time, then Lord Kapila, he will talk about the destructive nature of time. So when one hears about that, one gets this realization that I may think I will live for a long time, but ultimately I will be destroyed at the hands of time. So better for me to take to bhakti right now. And when a person hears about the cycle of samsara, then he will say that he will think that at the end of this life is not an end of my suffering. I will take birth again and I will suffer again. And then I will die because of the influence of time, and I will take birth again and I will suffer again. So best for me is to take shelter of bhakti. So this is the classical, the carrot and the stick. Lord Kapila will first describe the endearing quality of bhakti. How bhakti is sweet, how it is so attractive. He'll talk about pure devotional service. He will talk about Mishra Bhakti and the enjoyment in that bhakti. And then one is basically attracted to it. And then he talks about the current situation. Or Devahuti is asking him to talk about the current situation. Every moment we are being killed at the hands of time. But even that killing is not really going to relieve our suffering. Because the nature of the world is that after we get killed, we are born again, and then killed again, and born again. So together this forms a powerful impetus, a pull by the enduring qualities of bhakti and a push by the destructive elements of the material world. So even though Devahuti says that I'm a simple woman, what do I know? But we can understand that she's not only very compassionate, but she's very intelligent. That she wants to create an environment for Jana Kalyan, for the benefit of people as a whole. So we'll do the first two verses and then we'll stop. We'll probably run out of time. So verses 1 and 2. Devahutir vacha lakshanam mahadadinam prakrite purushasya cha swarupam lakshate mesham yena tat paramartikam yatha sankhe shriyo katitam yanmulam tat prachakshate bhakti yogasya me margam Bruhi Vistrasaha Prabhu. Devahuti inquired, My dear Lord, you have already very scientifically described the symptoms of the total material nature and the characteristics of the spirit according to the Sankhya system of philosophy. Now I shall request you to explain the path of devotional service, which is the ultimate end of all philosophical systems. So this is the first question of Devahuti, that give me the details of bhakti. So this conversation is one of the potent conversations because it is revealing to us the details of bhakti. And Bhagavatam is essentially a collection of conversations. There are so many conversations where there is question and answers going on, and we are reaping the benefit of those conversations. Right? The Bhagavatam in itself is a conversation between the sages of Naimisharanya and Sutta Goswami, where Sutta Goswami is relating a conversation between Maharaj Parikshit and Sukadev Goswami. So what are some of the other prominent conversations that happen in Bhagavatam? Name one prominent conversation in the Bhagavatam.
Vidur Maitreya.
Vidur
and Maitreya. Very good. We are actually in the middle of that conversation. This conversation is actually happening within Vidur and Maitreya. That actually goes on for 2 cantos. We are almost at the end of the 3rd canto, and it will go all the way into the end of the 4th canto. What else? Another prominent conversation.
Krishna and Uddhava.
Krishna and Uddhav. Very good. Krishna and Uddhav also happens here in the 3rd chapter. And where else does Krishna Uddhav happens? Where is the other? It's one of the longest.
11th.
Uddhav Gita.
Uddhav Gita in the 11th chapter, in the 11th canto. That happens. Any other conversation come to mind?
Probably the main conversation between Parikshit Maharaj, and this is where the whole conversation is going on.
Right. So I mentioned that earlier, that there are 2 outer conversations. One is between the sages of Naimisharanya and Sutta Goswami. And Sutta Goswami is now relating a conversation between Maharaj Parikshit and Sukadev Goswami. Now within that, there are nested conversations. So there is Vidur and Maitreya, there is Uddhav and Krishna.
There is Brahma also.
There is Brahma.
Lord Brahma and the demigod.
Brahma talks to Narad Muni in the 1st canto. Brahma talks to Narad Muni in the 2nd canto. And we see the Chaturshloki appearing as a result of that conversation. Then this conversation, Kapila and Devahuti, famous conversation. Another very, very famous conversation that all of you know because Prabhupada quotes from it very, very often.
And then Krishna and Bhishma Pita as well.
Between Krishna and, praise the Lord Bhishma. Yeah, less of a conversation. It's more of a prayer, but yeah.
Kunti and Krishna.
Yeah, that's not again, that's a prayer. But yes, you can consider it to be conversation. But there's a famous conversation that happens, and I'll give you a further hint. It happens in the 11th canto.
The gopis?
No, 11th canto. Not the
11th
10th.
canto.
It's the 11th canto. So this is between the 4 Kumaras and Maharaj Nimi. And the reason it's famous is, why is the reason that it's famous?
Four Kumaras and Prabhuji?
And Maharaj Nimi? Because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appears in that conversation. Right? Anybody remember the verse?
Krishna Varnam Tushakam Sangopangastravarsadam Yajnahi Sankirtan Prayajantihi Medeshaha. Just wondering if that's the verse.
Thank you, Prabhu. So Prabhupada quotes this very, very often, and that appears in a conversation between Maharaj Nimi no, I'm sorry. It appears between Maharaj Nimi and the Navyogendras. No wonder none of you were able to get it, because it's my mistake. It's actually between the Navyogendras and Maharaj Nimi, and specifically between the sage Karbhajan and Maharaj Nimi. Sorry about that. Another famous conversation, which is not as long as the Maitreya Uddhav Vartala, but is actually probably the second longest after that, is the conversation between Maharaj Yudhishthir and Narad Muni, which is most of the 7th canto. And then we have many other conversations. So in all these conversations, we see that there are some common attributes on the part of the questioner, the person who is asking questions, that they begin by summarizing their own understanding. And this is in order to level set the answering paradigm. The same question can be answered at different levels. So the person will first share a little bit of their realization, so that the person who is answering can give an answer based on the level of understanding. Second is that they will appreciate the subject matter, genuinely appreciate, to indicate that this is not idle curiosity, but they're asking it because they actually feel in their heart the need to know more about the subject matter. Third thing that they do is they will glorify the speaker. And this is to express their genuine appreciation for the qualities of the speaker. Fourth thing is that they will glorify the speaker's understanding of the subject matter. And this is mostly for our benefit, that the conversation is important because the person is a authority on that subject. Otherwise, we think that we are also an authority. Why should we listen to another person? But when the person is asking, then they will glorify that you know this very well. You have already understood it. You have explained it to others. You are the only one who can dissipate it. Nobody else can help me. So they're glorifying the speaker and the understanding of the subject. And the fifth and most important is they will express genuine gratitude. The speaker is under no compulsion to answer any question, but they're expressing gratitude in anticipation of the mercy that the speaker is extending to answer the question. So we see the same mood over here, that Devavati begins by appreciating all that has been spoken by the Lord. And in that, she is also summarizing her own understanding. That I can understand that you have spoken about Sankhya, that you have spoken about Lakshanam and Swarupam. You have spoken about the qualities and the nature of the Mahadanyam, of the material world. This is the 26th chapter. You have spoken about Prakriti, material nature, and you have spoken about Purushasya. Purushasya in this case refers to the Jiva and the Paramatma. So she says that I have understood that you have spoken about all this. So she's glorifying the Lord. She's establishing her own understanding. Now she is inquiring about Bhakti Yogasya. She's inquiring about devotional service. And Lord Kapila will say, why are you asking this question? She says, Moolam, because this is the essence of it. So she's showing her appreciation for the topic. And Prabhupada, he explains that Lord Kapila will not only talk about bhakti in its maturity, but also about the bhakti in its progressive stages. And then he also says that the glories of devotional services are elaborately explained, and the influence of time on the conditioned soul is also described. The purpose of elaborately describing the influence of time is to detach the conditioned soul from the material activities, which are considered to be simply a waste of time. So Prabhupada gives the analogy of not Prabhupada, that's an not sure where this analogy is from, either from Vishwanath Chakravarti or from Bhushan Prabhu, but the analogy is that one is simply studying and analyzing recipes. But they may study and analyze recipes, they will never have their hunger satiated. Until the person cooks, hunger will not be satisfied. So the Jnani may study and analyze philosophy, but happiness will not be experienced unless they practice it. That's why Prabhupada says that the ultimate goal is Krishna consciousness. So in the purport, Prabhupada makes a very similar point to that he makes in Bhagavad Gita 3.3. Right? In 3.3 he says that religion without philosophy is sentiment or sometimes fanaticism, and philosophy without religion is mental speculation. Ultimate goal is to combine the two, to understand the philosophy and also to practice it. And the reason Prabhupada is saying this is because he does not want to negate all that has been spoken by Lord Kapila. So he has spoken 3 chapters on Sankhya. Prabhupada, now within the purport of those chapters, he did tend to diminish a little bit, saying that not as important. But he doesn't want to negate it. He's saying there is a reason why this philosophy was spoken. Because if that philosophy was not there, then what we would have is simply sentimentality, or in a worse case, fanaticism. But then he's saying this is also important because all that philosophy that has been explained, it needs to be put into practice through the process of bhakti, else it will become simply mental speculation. So that way Prabhupada is aligning Sankhya with bhakti. He is aligning the teaching of Kapila in the category of Sankhya and Yoga as maturing in the practice of bhakti. Okay, so apologies for going over time. Any last thoughts, questions, comments on this?
Hare Krishna Prabhu. I think Srila Prabhupada also gave another analogy about the jaw of the honey. We can talk a lot about the honey, sweet, and this. Until the time you open the jaw, you put your finger and you taste it.
We won't be able to experience the sweetness of the honey. Yeah, thank you. Prabhupada would give that analogy also.
Just one reminder, I have been checking through the postings by Prem Kishore Prabhu. I saw only up to chapter 25 of the third canto. The study questions are there, the Purva Swadhyaya questions. I don't know if I'm correct, but for the chapters after chapter 25, there I haven't seen them.
I'll check and update.
Okay, you want me to send it or you have it, Prabhu?
I'll check it and reach out to you.
Okay.
I'll double check.
Okay, if not, I'll send them to you. Okay, we'll end here. So as like I mentioned, we'll not be seeing each other next week. We'll see the following Monday. Panchakalpatarubhayascha kripa sindhubhyeva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Anant Koti Vaishnavind ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Tagore Premanand. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna.